Hi, I'm Richard Addis. I'm Staff Content Services Engineer at Dolby here in London. I'm joined today with some of the team behind the BBC One natural history series, 7 Worlds, 1 Planet, narrated by David Attenborough. We're delighted to be joined today by Fredi Devas, the director and producer of the first episode in the series, which covers the continent out of Antarctica, as well as sound editor Kate Hopkins from Wounded Buffalo in Bristol, and lastly by dubbing mixer Graham Wild. The series was mixed in Dolby Atmos, and we're here today to have a conversation about the creative process behind the sound of the show and how working in Dolby Atmos helped the team to bring the varied life on the 7 continents to our screens and loudspeakers in vivid and lifelike detail. So thank you all for joining us today. First of all, do each of you want to go around and introduce yourselves and just let us know what role you held in the creation of the show? Fredi, do you want to kick us off?
I'm Fredi Devas. I'm a producer-director in the BBC Natural History Unit. So I was the producer and director on the first episode, as you said.
Hi, I'm Kate Hopkins. I was one of the sound editors on 7 Worlds. I've been working in the industry for quite a few decades now, mostly natural history.
My name's Graham Wild. I'm a dubbing mixer or re-recording mixer. I've been working in natural history largely for the last few years, 20 odd years, maybe a bit more. And I've been working on lucky enough to work on lots of landmark series that the BBC produce every year or every other year. And I was dubbing mixer on most of the series for 7 Worlds. And I've worked closely with both Fredi and Kate over the years. So this was our latest creation.
Fantastic. So, Fredi, we'll start with you. Could you give us a bit of an overview of what the premise for the series was and how the process started, how it all came about?
So the series began in 2016, early in 2016. So it took around 4 years before it broadcast, and then of course it carries on being broadcast around the world years later. And really it was the first chance to look at wildlife on our planet in terms of where that wildlife is found, those 7 continents, because each continent has its own characteristics and its own set of constraints around how wildlife can evolve. And so that was really interesting to see how right from the start, you've got Pangaea, one big landmass, and as it breaks apart, then different animals are found on those different continents and they evolve in totally different ways. So I think it was a really nice premise to work with. And it was also fun to try to characterize the whole continent, even though each episode is only an hour long. That's what we were aiming to do.
Obviously, it's a very long process, 4 years, you say. At what point in that process do you start thinking about the end product? I mean, when do you start thinking about deliverables and technical specs and deciding how you're going to shoot this and what formats you're going to deliver in?
It's an interesting question because I tend to work on landmark series. So I actually in 2016 had just finished working with Graham and Kate on Planet Earth 2, the Cities episode. So it's at that point when it's freshest in my mind about recording sound and how to work with the sound in the process right at the end when you're making the film past the edit in post-production. And so I suppose it's with the whole team for that 4 years, but you're trying to remember what you did 4 years ago. So in terms of the tech format and all that, I mean, I'll leave Graham and Kate to tell you more about that. They're the experts in that field. So really, from my perspective, I'm just thinking it's great to work with them because I trust that what they're going to deliver is going to be great. And within that comes what formats they choose and what software they choose and all those things.
Passing it over to you, Graham and Kate, then. Yeah. At what point in time in the process did you know that you were going to be working in Atmos, and who is it in the process that determines that technical choice?
So I think you quite early on, didn't we? That was
Graham
who made the final decision that it was going to be in that.
I mean, I some of the kind of I don't know if they call them post-production meetings, but they're kind of the production's being filmed. It's in the process of being made, but during that 4 years is when they obviously make decisions about formats and those kind of things. So when we were having meetings before any of the post-production had started, we were talking about should it be in 5.1, should it be in Atmos, and all those kind of things, and everybody put their preferences in, and we looked at schedules and timings and costs and those kind of things. And I think the production decided they wanted to go for, the kind of the top line, as do as much as we could, put as much into the sound, focus on that as much as we can. So it was decided fairly early on that we would deliver a full Dolby Atmos soundtrack for the whole series.
It seems more and more now that more and more natural history content, top tier natural history content such as this, is being mixed in Atmos. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I mean, certainly is. I mean, I don't think I've worked on a non-Atmos, top tier natural history series for 4 years now. So
about 4 years.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Fredi, what if you're kind of waiting for the 4 year cycle to come around and be told what what format and technologies you're going to be using? Were you aware of Dolby Atmos before coming into this project? What's your experience been with working with the format?
I was aware of it, but I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. And to be honest, I'm not aware of the competition. I'm not aware of what else there is and the pros and cons. It sounds good to my ears, Dolby Atmos. So when I hear that, that's the name, in the sense that you think, oh, okay, that's a brand that I recognize. But I'm not an expert, Richard, so I can't say, well, compared to the other process, then there's these pros and cons.
I think from Fredi's point of view, he needs to be satisfied that it's adding to the end result if it needs to, or if it can. But also, a lot of new technologies sometimes tend to get in the way, and so it's like, oh, we can't do this because we're using this system or that system. And actually, hopefully Fredi felt that we didn't have any of those problems at all. We didn't need to do extra things because of working this way.
I think it was the whole process was, as Fredi and other producers are used to, and the final result is different and hopefully better, but the process, it wasn't any more complicated.
Yeah.
And obviously it got what producers wanted to hear, which is the most important thing.
At what point in the production or pre-production process even are you starting to think about sound and the sonic storytelling element of filmmaking?
Before we go shooting, the team will typically go on a sound course. Anyone who's going to be out in the field will get a great sound recordist like Chris Watson, who will go and give you a whole load of hints and tips about how to record sound. One thing I really remember was when he showed us that he he recorded the sound of this little wave from a top mic, and it sounded really high pitched and like a tiny little wave. And then he took a hydrophone and he buried it 25 centimeters under the sand, and then he played the sound back to us. And we had this kind of massive roar of a wave crashing, and he filmed it as well, so we could see it was a medium-sized wave. And then he mixed them together, and it sounded just perfect with the pictures. So tips like that are really good. And in fact, something we did was we delivered to Kate an elephant seal roaring, and these males are about 6 meters long, weigh about 4 tons. And we'd managed to get a gun mic on it, but we'd also gone up to a sleeping bull and buried a hydrophone under the sand, because when it roars, it sort of vibrates the thing. So we tried it. I'm not sure that it worked, Kate, but we were trying the same concept. So we're thinking about it.
I know.
And we're risking our lives, but it's not actually helping.
Kate's just shaking her head.
No, that was a great attempt. That was a fantastic attempt, but maybe it's just
So I think but it was interesting. A lot of the creative flair comes right at the end in the post-production process once it gets to Wounded Buffalo.
Very organic sort of process. I mean, Fredi will hand us film. You will have, you have sound, ideas that you want to come across, but we'll look at the film and we've got our own ideas as well. I do give lots of shout outs going, we haven't got any of these animals, so if you're thinking of doing them, please record them. So yes, and we do have conversations quite early on about, and a sort of shopping list, which, sometimes it can do, sometimes it can't. And sometimes they come back stuff we were never expecting, which is always very cool. And then we've got a library of sound, especially generic stuff that we'll do.
I talked to Kate and Tim at the start of the Antarctica filming process and said, right, these are the species that we want to film. Which calls should we really prioritize? And what was interesting that even though, say, king penguins, there's lots of archive material of king penguin calls, I think it was really good to get some more. Kate was like, great, we've got some more elephant seal calls, we've got some more king penguin calls. And if you're going all the way to the Antarctic,
exactly,
pack a mic to spend a bit of time getting what it was like right there and then, I think is key.
Knowing that you're going to be working with Atmos, is there anything that you would advise done differently, or specific things that you might want to capture on location, or is it you just expecting to get exactly the same rushes that you would on a normal production?
I would just hope for stereo and mono well recorded wild tracks, because you can. Me and Graham have talked about this before. You can have ambisonic recordings, but they tend to be very specific to a specific shot. Whereas what we do is, you layer up, sort of like, say it's insects, you've got insects sort of around the bottom, and as you pan up or cut to the canopy is going to sound not completely different, but there'll be different layers. So recording-wise, it's just long recordings with idents, with some proper level, is the most important thing.
If you had to pick out one really standout kind of abstract experimental sonic moment from the series, which has come out of some of your more experimental recording, is there anything in the show which made it to the final mix?
There's this moment where a leopard seal is chasing a penguin, and the penguin manages, after a very long chase, to swim and jump up onto an iceberg. And Graham did this whoop type sound, which slows time down. And I remember first hearing it and thinking, wow, that's something I'd much more associate with hearing in a cinema than I do in a traditional wildlife series.
Those moments where we use that sound were kind of, we could just use something just to up the ante here a little bit, or just to make us think things are slightly off kilter. And so using a really nice surroundy kind of sound just to make you have a little bit of extra tension or something worked really well, didn't it?
Mm.
What did you use? What effect did you use to put into it?
I can't tell you that. It was one of yours, don't worry.
And then we try to experiment a little bit now and again, and that's probably hopeless, but it's quite enjoyable.
No.
We move. I remember in New York, we were moving the microphones around a lot. Generally, we go out with a coat hanger and have the two microphones on the microphones there to give kind of ear distance apart. But then we started putting them other side of buildings to get the sirens of the big fire trucks going down, which we thought sounded great, but I'm not sure if that was useful.
It was very good to have them.
I wanted to talk about the creative process with the whaling station. So in the Antarctica episode, we had a section which is looking at the commercial hunting of whales. And so it's very unusual in a landmark wildlife series to have a sequence that has no animals in it whatsoever. And that's something we talked about through the process, and especially towards the end as well, was how do you evoke the memory of hundreds of thousands of whales that have been killed and then slaughtered and processed in this whaling station. And so, although we're at a whaling station which was really quite quiet when we were filming there, the introduction of some distant whale calls and some of the mechanized sounds that you would have heard when the whaling station was active, I think really brought a lot of the atmosphere to the scene. And then what I love about that scene is you come in off the sea and you arrive at the whaling station, and it's strange to, in the middle of a wildlife show about Antarctica, suddenly see a rusting boat and old buildings and all this machinery to process these whales. And at the start of the shot, you just hear a ding of a bell, and it's the ding of the church bell. And that just suddenly you go, oh, we're in a human world now. And I think it also allows you, with the imagery of the stars in time-lapse moving around all this infrastructure, it allows you to go into a more ethereal world. And that's the soundscape that's bringing that in. So there are some sequences that are much more, this is the animal behavior and we want to replicate that. And there are others that I feel are really creative, really about evoking a scene.
And that was a lovely sequence for me to track lay. It was because you could see it all there in the pictures, and you can go, okay, it can be like the sound of a buoy going, and you can hear the metal creaking, the furnace kind of blasting, but all done, mixed in a way so it's subtle, and you're just kind of passing these things by. So you've got a distance between what you're seeing and what it's representing. It was fun to track lay.
Yeah, that was a good example of a sequence where you'd thought that, Fredi, right from the early on in the edit, you had that idea of how you wanted it to go, and then that kind of flowed through what Kate had done. And then when we got into the final mix, actually, it wasn't exactly the same as you'd done in the offline, and it wasn't exactly the same as your original idea because we'd embellished and changed it. And in some ways, we'd simplified it a lot, so we'd made it sparser than I think probably you'd originally imagined. But Kate put in some really key sounds that we just used very powerfully now and then, and just actually with the music bed, just kind of left it all quite ethereal and subtle. But actually, it didn't need too much, but just the right amount, just to tell the message. It was really good.
I remember watching that sequence, and that slow reveal where the camera's gradually, slowly approaching. You see the rusted hulk of the ship coming in from the top of the frame. It's revealed so slowly that you're not quite sure whether you're looking at something which is still supposed to be animal and natural, and then you realise what's going on. Do you think you approach mixing and panning and use of Atmos differently in those more abstract ethereal sections than you would?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be as literal in those occasions. So you are creating a kind of feeling, and you're thinking more about emotion, kind of what the story's conveying in those moments. So yes, you don't, things aren't trying to match picture. You're creating a soundscape. And one thing on that particular sequence I really liked is actually the narrative through that is so strong and it's so emotional. So we're adding these things in, and when I was saying about being subtle, you don't want to distract from what's being said. The words, the story there is so strong. And actually the end of that scene, we ended up just taking all the sound out and letting it just kind of float away, and a really long, nice, subtle reverb. And you cut to the shot of the whale's eye, I think it is, Fredi, isn't it? And there's no change in sound, even though we've gone from telling a story in the past about how things used to be to some present day footage of a whale swimming underwater. There's no change in the sound. We just let it drift over from one to the other. And then over about 20-30 seconds, gradually bring you into underwater, and you realise what you're watching, and the camera pulls out, and you're suddenly, only when you see quite a lot of the whale are we actually then in the whale's atmosphere, in its world and with it, and then the story kind of moves on to the next stage. But for me, that's a lovely bit of that sequence, just the way it ends.
Graham, I've got something in my head, but it's been niggling all session. I can't remember what it is. There was a time when we were thinking about the sound up in the roof, up in the ceiling.
Yeah.
You were doing something really specific with the sound up there. I just can't remember what it was about, but you had a reason for putting it up there, why it was up there.
And there's
Water?
the which. Sorry, Kate.
The underwater.
The underwater sequences. You know, when
Yeah, and
go back to
generally in the underwater, I've always kind of got different layers of things panned around, and certainly a lot. There was a couple of bits where we were doing stuff where we had sort of more choral elements to the music that we were floating around and moving those around.
That's it. Yes, that was exactly it.
Was
Yeah,
that what
the
it was?
human
Yeah.
voices coming from the heavens. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's a weird thing. I don't know why that would be the case, but quite often it just sounds nice when you've got kind of more ethereal, floaty voices. They just kind of lend themselves to coming out of the ceiling. I don't know why that is. It's just
it's the angels, Graham. That's why.
It's a sound cliche, but it worked quite well. I don't know why.
Wounded Buffalo, you've got a very, very long track record of working in natural history. Was that originally a very focused intent to pursue natural history, or is it just circumstantial?
I think it's part of it circumstantial. When Tim and Max started the company we were trying to work this out, I think it's about 29 years ago, 30 years ago. It was actually sort of, Max had worked at one company, Tim was freelance, and I think it was 909s, which was a show that was going at the time, and we got the contract for that, and they worked on those. So it was that kind of kept Wounded Buffalo going to start with. You have to remember, we worked on film to start with, but Max had started on one of the original audio files. And then between us, we all started learning them. I kind of joined Buffalo sort of not long after. I mean, sort of, I still just working with them. And so we all learnt the same equipment. And then because I worked on natural history for years before, and actually so with Tim, but that was when it was on film. And then this Wounded Buffalo started, and we did have to persuade people that we could do natural history in a sound digitally, because I did go, okay, well, you're not doing it on 16mm. How's this going to work? Okay, it'll be absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. So we got to it on very early days of digital sound, and then because of where we were, obviously there's lots of natural history. I worked with the natural history unit a lot already on natural worlds and lots of wildlife on ones. Actually, so did Tim, and I think and there was Blue Planet, and then Planet Earth, and Planet Earth. Me and Tim did we shared the sound edit on that, and Graham mixed that. And so it's gone on, and it isn't lots of natural history. We do other things. We do animations, we do dramas and documentaries and all sorts of stuff. But yes, natural history is my bread and butter.
So you mentioned audiophile. You've over the years been very open to getting involved with new technologies, and Atmos, I think, has been no different. You've recently put in a Dolby Atmos facility there. Can you talk at all about what the drivers behind the decision to make that leap were?
I think there was a few things. Tim and Max of Wounded Buffalo owned the building next door, which was doing nothing. It was kind of just sat there, undeveloped, but it was always going to be a useful space. Me and Tim and Graham, we went to the Emmys, and we worked that out. It was about 10 years ago, and went to Dolby, and they showed, I think it was one of the Frozen episodes, or a few episodes of what was being nominated for Emmys in their Dolby Atmos theatre, and we were sat there going, well, this is nice.
Cool.
All our stuff to sound like this, because they were playing. Obviously, we hadn't done a Dolby Atmos mix, but they, put it through, and we're going, ooh, interesting. So when we came back, that was always that was kind of okay. If we're going to have a new dubbing theatre, a big dubbing theatre, which is what was always going to be the plan. Let's do it properly.
From a mixing point of view, and I suppose also from a sound editorial and prep kind of point of view, what was the learning curve like for you guys when you started working on Atmos?
I think we actually got away quite lightly. I mean, we knew there was more opportunities for how things could be panned, how much Atmos you could hear the different frequencies that could be used. But I think for us, it was it's the same process. As long as, you've got everything you want to hear, and as long as Graham has got enough to work with. So I think for us, that's what it was. And we're all using Pro Tools, so it kind of, our session just goes over to Graham as it would normally do. So that was.
But I think to start with, I was probably asking you for a few extra layers here and there, and I was just saying, actually, for this scene, can we just have some more stuff for me to pan around and just make it a bit more? But there's always that danger with sound of, which I'm always trying to fight against, is like sound brown. If you get colours and mix them together, you get brown, and you can very easily do that in a sound world too. So it's not just a case of chucking more stuff in. It's just a case of maybe choosing things that are a little bit more specific and being able to position them more. Because if you've got 5 busy rainforest atmospheres, that's not necessarily going to make you a nice Dolby Atmos rainforest sound. You're going to have 5 busy soundtracks panned around. So, sometimes we have to be a bit more specific about choosing individual things and panning those around rather than just adding more and more and more of the same in.
In terms of workflow going from the editorial process into the dubbing suite, is there any major differences when working with Atmos?
From Kate's point of view, with the differences in the track load we've already discussed, but in terms of actually the workflow, not really. I could say to Fredi and the production team, it's not going to cost any more time to do this. It's going to be, in terms of pre-mixing and mixing, it's just going to be as straightforward as we normally do it. Instead of just panning it to these 5 speakers, I can now pan it anywhere I want in the little squash court thing that's behind me here. I can choose anywhere in there, and I can put it wherever I want to.
People's expectation of Dolby Atmos as an object-based audio, people understand the concept if you're talking about large-scale, effects-heavy action kind of sequences with lots of things flying around. Do you have any examples of how you've used the Atmos format in more subtle ways? What does working at that end of the spectrum? What does working in Atmos allow you to do at that end of the scale?
I know it's a sort of overused word, but it does make it more immersive. You can subtly move the atmospheres. So they do, in fact, what Dolby Atmos does, I think, for natural history, is do what we always hoped 5.1 did, but it does it a lot better and it's a lot more subtle, and it feels more real. And especially if you can take the natural history to cinema as well, it adds a huge amount, because you can have it, it's all around you on different levels. It's up and it's down. And I think that's what it adds to. I mean, I think there are sequences where you can take those objects and move them around, and I think for cinema it works, and you can still do it for telly. You just got to be quite. I mean, Graham will know how much you actually use when you're doing it for TV.
One of the things that I find is people say, "Oh, well, what is this adding? What difference? What's the difference? Because 5.1 is surround sound, so what's the point in doing Atmos?" So we tend to. A really good example is to then play a sequence where we haven't got any sounds that are particularly distracting in the surrounds or up in the top speakers. We're just listening to it as it's mixed. If you then play that sequence again in 5.1, people tend to go, "Oh, right, I get it now. Okay, so that's right." And so what it is it's a subtle expansion of the whole sound sphere to surround you completely. Whereas if you've just got it in 5.1, it's just coming from those speakers around. You might not actually be able to pinpoint the difference, but it sounds a lot better and a lot more around you, and you feel like you're really in it when you're listening in the Atmos environment. When you listen to the collapsed down 5.1 from a Dolby Atmos mix, you get a lot more. You still get remnants of that surround mix more than you did if you mixed it in 5.1 in the first place. That's the slightly spooky thing. So I find that you can pan things over your head in an Atmos situation, and you can then listen to it in 5.1, and you still think they're going over your head, and they're not, because in a 5.1 you're not using the speakers above. You might be in a room that doesn't have those speakers above, but you can still your brain still tells you it's going overhead, and that's some kind of strange, clever thing in the way that it mixes down from the Atmos to the 5.1. So even just if you were delivering in 5.1, I still have, would premix in Atmos just because I can get those pans in. In a 5.1 sound field, you might pan things kind of, back and left a little bit. And then when that's collapsed down to stereo, there'll be some phase shift added so that the sound doesn't just come from slightly to the left. It's got a little bit of phase shift in it, so it sounds like it's a little bit back as well. And although you've got two speakers, it will sound a bit different. Whereas if you're just mixing in stereo, you'd pan it 2/3 of the way to the left, and it would be coming just from the front. There's very few people who would go to the length of, I'm just mixing in stereo, so I'm going to add, rather than panning this left, I'm going to add a bit of phase shift and try and make that so it's not quite left, it sounds. But whereas with the Atmos situation, it's very easy just to pan it where you want, and then when you listen to stereo, you've got those artifacts kind of built in.
When you're track laying, are you thinking about where the sounds that you're laying in are going to be placed within the wider and height channels?
Yes. I mean, you definitely know if there's, say you've got kind of sea and you've got whales sort of blowing there, but you've also got gulls, so you've got the possibility, which are just flitting past at the top of the screen, but there's a possibility of them being sort of pushed up to the top of the room or the screen. So yes, you take that into account. Obviously most of the time what you're doing is you're looking at what's on the screen and what is going to help tell the story. But there are times when you think, well, okay, you can add a bit more, and that that there's frequency space and there's actual space for effects to be put in. And I think that was also what was so good about Dolby Atmos is being able to pull back from the screen a bit, which in a way frees up. There's more space for specific effects. You can somehow hear everything.
It gives
down the front. It can just all.
Yeah. It gives you more sound real estate, doesn't it? You've got more space to be able to use things around in the audio space. And quite often we've got narration, or we've got music which might be driving a sequence, so then you can put some of the sounds in other places, so they're still there, reinforcing what's going on if needed, and vice versa. So sometimes we might have a very effects-heavy sequence, and we'll just move the music backwards, so the music's kind of doing a more supporting role from around and above, and let the action take place on screen.
When it comes to the very, very end of the process and you're in deliverables creation world, how do you find that process working with both Dolby Atmos and also the legacy deliverables of 5.1 and stereo?
We're stuck in a bit of a strange time at the moment because, as you said, we used to do stereo, so we did everything in stereo. So, Fredi, I was working out the other day for Planet Earth 1. One of the episodes, when we were just delivering a final mix and an M&E, would fit on 2 CDs for the full delivery. So it would take, I could give somebody 2 CDs for the full delivery for a program. For the series that we're just working on now for the BBC, we'd need 500 CDs to deliver the audio for one episode. Because there's just so many different versions and different flavours, and this one's got a logo on the front and this one hasn't, and this one's in Atmos and this one's in stereo, and we want all 72 different BWAVs for each of those versions. So there's a lot to produce at the end, and actually the mixing time is kind of the same. It doesn't make any difference, and if you can do re-renders and spit a lot of things out at the same time, that's quite good. But yeah, we're in this strange world where we're producing stereo and we're producing 5.1 and we're producing Dolby Atmos. So there is more to make because there is just more needed. The irony is that actually from the Dolby Atmos we could make stereo and 5.1 at a later date, and we could use Dolby Atmos as a deliverable in itself and just send that round, and people can extract the various different things from that file. But that involves changing a lot of the infrastructure in the way people reversion things and that kind of stuff. So at the moment we're stuck in this funny world where everybody needs every format rather than just take the one that you can then make them all from.
So for all of those deliverables, you're still considering that the Atmos is the kind of master format and then everything else derives from that. Is that how you're working?
Yeah, because in my experience there are no nasty artifacts from using the Atmos as your master. I think there's some reluctance to start with, where people were noticing coding errors and things like that. But actually, we monitor very closely through the Atmos monitor, and we use the down mixes from within the Atmos monitor setup. So So yeah, if you can come if you've got too many things panning in too many directions at the same time. Sometimes you can get caught out, but as long as you listen through the software, actually you can hear what's going on. So you can catch those easily.
Overall, what do you think that Dolby Atmos brought to the show over and above what working in stereo or 5.1 could have done?
And I think as a sound editor, we know everything we're track laying is going to be mixed at the highest possible quality, and there is more options for effects that wouldn't necessarily be heard or we want to be put in that can be put in without overloading it with sound, and it's just a nicer sound. So it's very pleasing when you track lay something and hear it in Dolby Atmos because it's as good as it's going to get.
For me, it enables us to go into greater levels of detail because the final format has got more possibilities than had we just mastered in stereo or 5.1. So if you're listening in a really good monitoring setup, you can hear a better end result in Atmos than you would be able to in stereo and 5.1. But then even for those listeners listening in stereo and 5.1, actually having mixed it in that bigger format, we can get more nuances and finer detail in that end stereo result that they still hear. It's quite interesting. I had a chat with the production team recently, and they were saying, interestingly, they said, "Oh no, this might be only in 5.1," which is interesting. Just kind of, indication that people are getting used to that. Actually, that Dolby Atmos is the ultimate format, and actually, if you want to do it slightly cheaper, you might only do it in 5.1 or only do it in stereo as a kind of lesser value product. But it's obviously all budget dependent. But that was their perception.
Now you've reached the end of the process, could you imagine 7 Worlds, 1 Planet having been done not in Dolby Atmos?
I can, but I don't think we would have been able to put the level of detail in that we did.
All I can say is that it sounded great. So I'm really happy.
That'll be our headline endorsement.
Yeah.
Fredi Devas, it sounded great.
Yeah.
Right.
That comes to the end of all of the questions that I had for you guys. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for the three of you joining us today. So yeah, with that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Thanks then.